sure that we had everything covered so that we wouldn't make a recommendation and find that we couldn't do what we said. So what I asked, what we did today is put together some frequently asked questions. You may not ask these questions, but something that I thought would be helpful for everybody. And it might be something that we can walk through because we do have a full presentation that we will be giving at the city council meeting relative to the staff's recommendation. But I think these are the things that we've heard. First of all, will I be required to pay anything initially? And the answer is no, you'll not be required to pay anything until you tie the public system or sell your property. Will I be required to tie into the public sewer main if my septic system is functioning? No, you're not going to have to. It has been a long-standing practice to waive that requirement to the tie-in the septic system if it's functioning. The practice will actually we need to update our whole sewer ordinance, so we will make sure that's specifically spelled out in the sewer ordinance. But historically, we've allowed for people not to hook in until their system fails. Will I have to tie in once my septic system fails? Yes. And given the proximity of many of the properties to Sagamore Creek, tying in the system delivers an environmental benefit for that body of water. Will the cost to tie in be less expensive than replacing a failed septic system? In all likelihood, yes. As seen in the recent news article, one resident paid $37,000 for a new septic system. The proposed 80-20 split of capital costs with a $10,000 cap for single-family residents should help achieve the result, along with the availability of a 10-year no-interest loan. So essentially, if somebody wants to participate in that, it'd be about $1,000 a year, no interest, if the city council accepts the recommendation.
Is that a $10,000 cap just for the capital cost?
Just for the capital cost.
So then there's still a tie-in.
Right, so yeah, I'll get to that too.
Are we gonna have public dialogue?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Well, I thought,
Right after
Joe, that
presentation.
it would be helpful for people to see what the staff is recommending. So, I think there's been a lot of confusion, and again, I apologize for that. Is the proposed 80% sewer fund, 20% property owner split with $10,000 cap for single-family residential consistent with what other communities have done in similar situations? Yes. In Gloucester, Mass, and that's Essex, Mass, there's been a similar type of consent decree. In those instances, they've split it between 75% the homeowner has to pay and 25% from their sewer fund. So it is pretty much consistent with what's happened in other states and other localities.
And do you happen to have a dollar value on what that actually was?
What's that? I'm sorry.
Do you have a dollar value on that, not just a percentage value, but a dollar value?
On that one?
So they range based on which system they're doing, but I know Gloucester had a target cap of just around 20,000. That was their target. I don't know what their actual numbers were.
And again, that's why we proposed a cap on it, because we want people to be able to plan. And so the fact is that, by the end, when we go out to bid on this, it's going to be 2 or 3 years down the road before anything, before anybody's going to be required to pay anything. Yes, Joe?
Did the Gloucester citizens know that they were going to be wrapped into a consent decree and have a chance to know about these things?
This was just an example, Joe. You can, once I get through this, once you get through this, you can do what you
Let us give the
want.
presentation, then it's your show.
Yeah. Okay, so again, that split has been something that has 75% by the homeowner and 25% by the enterprise fund. Is the proposed 80-20 split, which caps the capital contribution at $10,000, consistent with the amount other property owners in the cities that have paid as a result of sewer extensions? Yes, most recently the Islington Street corridor, and others that we put in here are Brackett Road, Oxford Road, Pleasant Point, and of course, I just said Islington Street, and they've all ranged about the $10,000. Looking at the back of the sheet, you can see, are their costs, other than capital costs, the contribution? That was the question this gentleman had over here. You can see that from the curb to the house would be the responsibility of the owner. Does access to public sewer provide opportunities not available with a septic system? Pretty much yes. Most property owners prefer the aesthetic of a buried sewer lateral to a potentially large mound and vent necessary to accommodate a new septic system. In addition, having access to a public sewer allows property owners to make investments in their property that a septic system typically does not allow, size and number of rooms, et cetera. So I thought we'd put this out first so that people would at least have an idea of what the staff recommendation is. Certainly, that's part of our job, is to give a recommendation. And again, I'm sorry that there was some confusion about this, but we didn't want to put out some information that wouldn't be accurate and would not be able to be acted upon by the city council. So we made sure that whatever we gave the city council tonight was information that they could act on and proceed. So I'll open up, I'll let the mayor.
Yeah, so we'll open it up, and all we ask you is to give your name and what town you live in. So,
Gary Epler, 272 Walker Bungalow Road, Portsmouth. First of all, thank you for the opportunity, appreciate this. As some of you may know, I've been on the school board for almost 6 years now, and so having an opportunity for this kind of dialogue is really important, particularly in a situation like this where I think there's been some misinformation and I would suggest a lack of opportunity to get information. But I appreciate your time. I understand, you're basically volunteers. You put a lot of time into the city, so thank you for that. There's a couple of points I'd like to make, and I'd like to start out with suggesting that what would be most beneficial is a delay here and not to take a vote tonight and to allow further opportunity for dialogue, because I think there are a lot of people here with a number of concerns, both with their particular property and also just overall the process, and I think that would be helped if there was delay and further opportunity to dialogue with the city, and opportunity to look at some other possible solutions. There's a couple of considerations. I'll try to go through this really quickly because I know a lot of other people want to talk. But first of all, there have been commitments that were made in the past for significant opportunities for public information and dialogue before a decision would be made on cost allocation. And for example, I would point you to the July 10, 2017 City Council meeting, where the city manager made that promise twice. If you look at the tape of that, at the three-hour, 10-minute part of the tape, the 3-hour, 18-minute part of the tape, he assured the council that there'd be many opportunities for public input before cost allocation made. We're still waiting. We appreciate this opportunity, but we really haven't had opportunities before this. The second thing is that there are really significant differences between the current issue and past practices. I know a lot of what the staff is relying on is looking at some past practices, what they've done in other areas of the city, and also possibly some other areas in the region. For example, the ordinance requiring the homeowner to pay for the connection to the septic main was written at a time when those connections were to gravity-fed systems. This is a low-pressure system, and there's a significant difference in cost between connecting to a gravity-fed system or connecting via a low-pressure system. Because effectively what you're doing with a low-pressure system is you've moved the capital cost to something that's paid for by the city as a whole, like the pumping station, and you're moving those pumping stations to the individual homeowner. So you're shifting that capital burden to the homeowner, that operational burden to the homeowner. So by doing that, you effectively have increased significantly the cost to connect. So I think you have to look at your ordinance and your practice, what you've done in the past, with these really new circumstances and new information. It's different to connect, to require a homeowner to connect to via a low-pressure system versus a gravity-fed system. The other issue that's really important and other people will probably raise it, so I'll just touch on it, is that this obligation to connect arises out of the second consent decree. The second consent decree, if you look through it and read it carefully, there's very particular portions where the city is agreeing and the other plaintiffs are saying this second consent decree is necessary because of the city's failure to meet its obligations under the first consent decree. Now, I understand that there are a lot of reasons for that, a lot of valid reasons why the city couldn't meet its commitments. But nonetheless, the city was required to undertake mitigation measures, and this is one of those mitigation measures that the city put on the table and was accepted as part of the consent decree. Now, the city got, there's been talk about the benefit that the homeowners are getting by connecting to the sewer system. The city got a lot of benefit by putting this mitigation measure in and getting the other parties to agree to the second consent decree. You got major delay and in compliance. You were able to negotiate a rescheduling of your compliance deadlines. And so, of all the other mitigation measures, this is the only one where the cost of that mitigation measure is being forced on a select group of customers. And so that should be taken into consideration with whether you're looking at the capital costs of the mains or the costs of the individual hookups. The other thing is, I would suggest that in terms of cost allocation, you really don't have a lot of information because you don't know what the final cost is going to be, and you don't have a final design. So I think it's premature to talk about cost allocation until you really have that. The other thing is that this area has significant ledge, and that ledge is going to impact not just the putting in the mains, but it's going to impact the cost for many of the homeowners here in terms of the individual hookups. And that's another reason why you have to rethink how you've typically done cost allocation in the past. Because it's not only are you putting the capital cost of pump on the homeowner, but you're also in an area with significant ledge. And that comes into play because a lot of us were told previous to the second consent decree, when we either bought our houses or built houses or redid our septic systems, that yes, this plan is on the capital improvement plan, to extend sewer out here, but it'll never happen because there's so few houses involved. It's really a minimal impact on the Sagamore Creek in terms of overall pollution, and it's just too costly. And if you look at the cost benefit, it'll never happen, so don't worry about it. So all of a sudden now it becomes an issue in the negotiations in the second consent decree, and now you're telling us that we've got to connect, we've got to spend all this money for it, what's admittedly a really small environmental benefit. Although, as I said, as a homeowner, I border the Sagamore Creek, I realize I've got to be a good environmental steward. So I'm willing to undertake some, mitigation measures or some cost allocation.
Mr. Epler, if I could, this is all very helpful and really good. In order that we have a dialogue going on, and just out of respect to everyone here, we want to make sure that people have a chance to raise questions. And we'd be happy to. Is there something so far that you brought up that would be great?
There is one other issue I'd like to raise, and this goes to the issue of delay. I've worked in the utility field for quite some time. I was general counsel for the New Hampshire Public Utilities Commission for 5 years. And one of the things that you need to consider, that even if, and although I would disagree with this, even if you want to go ahead with cost allocation that's being proposed by staff, there are other ways to finance it, and that's what you should consider, and things that I think are available to the city and that may be really workable. These are long-lived assets, and typically in the public utility sphere or the utility spheres, you try to match your revenue stream with the life of the asset. So offering a longer-term payout, offering financing through the city, which is access to low-cost financing, not just for the capital costs of the mains, but also for the hookups. The city protects itself because under statute, you have the ability to attach liens. So you could be protected there, and offer financing and some of that for 20, 30 years, because that's the life of the assets. And so you really reduce the burden on the homeowner if you were to do something like that. With that,
So I'd like to comment on, I appreciate all that information. Right off the top, one of the first things you talked about was some more time for input and discussion. I think that makes a lot of sense in general, and we haven't deliberated as a council yet. I know we're going to hear the recommendations tonight. I feel like I'm learning more day by day, week by week. There are many of you that sent very compelling emails, respectful, constructive valid information, which I think is helping fill the picture. We're trying to get the same from the staff and the city manager, and so, to me, that is, right off the top, for me, that makes some sense that there's a lot here to go through, and we may need a little more time as a community to get through it. And just one other thing to mention, I think, so we all realize, you mentioned, you talk about, the city, and you use the word you. We're talking about, and I understand, I know you understand as a school board member, when we say the city, it's us, right? And so those costs are ours. That consent decree is for us. That's a restriction on us to fulfill certain requirements with the government. So those costs are things that we're all part of. This council didn't make decisions that led up to this. We're trying to deal with what we have now. We're trying to figure out a fair, reasonable way to get through.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I didn't mean to create that separation. I really do see this as a whole, and that's actually one of the things we're asking the city to consider, that whatever is done is seen as a benefit to the city as a whole, and therefore some further cost sharing other than what has been offered, I think is appropriate. But your points are very well taken.
No,
Anything else?
raise your hand and
Sure.
one of us can.
Sir,
Yeah, it's kind of a
please.
team effort.
Yep.
Just a technical issue.
If you don't mind
Just let
standing,
me,
Nate.
let me jump in. It is difficult, I'm not even far back, and I am having a great difficulty hearing each individual that's speaking. So if either everyone can project their voice so you can hear, or if we can get a speaker system in so everyone can hear what's being discussed.
I will speak up.
Or
Yeah.
Rusty, you can stand up.
Speak up. If you wouldn't mind standing up, I think would help. Yeah.
My name is Russ Foster. I'm a Portsmouth resident in the neighborhood. Technically, I'm accustomed to municipalities putting in a pump station and gravity fed to it so that the municipality owns the pump station, controls the pump station, can maintain the pump station, has engineers that understand that gravity feeding, which is relatively low tech, is then used to service that. Back when the bridge was put in and Sagamore Road was rebuilt, was the time to engineer a real live municipal extension. A gravity collection system to a real pump station, integral with the bridge, up through Sagamore while rebuilding. So you don't go back and rebuild everything. But they didn't do that then. And so now we have a Band-Aid approach.
There you go.
Now we have what's more of a Band-Aid approach, which is a smaller, lower tech, lower cost, low pressure system, where the city puts in a sewer and you're recommending that each homeowner buy their own pump station and connect. Well, I think that if we are stuck now rebuilding Sagamore Road, we still have to blast, we still have to go in and tear it up the way we did when we rebuilt it. If we're gonna put in this low pressure system, the city should engineer and take charge of all the pumping. Homeowners aren't capable of that. We can't design them. We don't wanna own them. As a matter of fact, the city wants to own them so they can control them. Each of the pumps is gonna require a generator. No. 2 or 3 pumps can run off one municipal generator. As a matter of fact, there'll be some collection issues, and maybe 2 or 3 homes can be on one pump back into the city's low-pressure system. It really needs to be thought through and engineered, but I really want the city to own that pumping.
Anyone else? Put your hand in mic to the next person.
My name is Corinne Norris. I live on Cliff and Walker Bungalow Road. Several of us have those similar driveways. And so I don't have a lot of technical expertise. What I do know is that this kind of a project is, I think many of us in the room would agree, has been sudden, unexpected. Walker Bungalow Road was paved 2 years ago, or I think. And this was nowhere in sight when that happened. which is, even my 16-year-old son said, well, why didn't they do it then? So, I've read a lot of the neighborhood comments about what does this do? It sets a precedent in the city. If this project can come so fast and so quickly, and holes have already been drilled in the roads to do the core samples, it's really frightening, unexpected, out of the blue, and the concept of please a delay and any quick. And again, I don't have the expertise that many of the people in the room have, but I do respect all of everyone's efforts on the council. But the whole concept of setting precedent into what about other neighborhoods in the city? What does this say about Portsmouth? If this can happen in this neighborhood and homeowners are expected to pay X dollars, which we don't know yet, what about other neighborhoods? And I would hope the whole city would think about that, because when sewer lines are replaced, it's city taxpayers' dollars. So this is a very, very different animal. I don't know, we talked earlier in the presentation about Bartlett or whatever roads that I don't know if those homeowners had to pay. So I'm ignorant in that conversation. So that's all I have to say. So thank you for your time.
Can I pass it down?
Can I just ask you,
Sure,
if Jerry
pass
might
it.
just give a little background on this, just so that
Pass
you
the
can
mic
hear?
down.
Heard public dialogue.
Okay, sure. What's up, Mayor?
You pass the mic down, and, yeah.
Could I just, I want to respond to the dialogue part of it. I think precedent's a very important part of certainly the calculus I'm trying to make in how to move forward in this. And I agree with you, and I think there's potentially nuance where this follows a previous precedent, and there's other ways to look at it where it's very distinct and different. So I think it's an important point in deciding how to move forward, because some might say there is precedent for work being done and being shared by those who are receiving that benefit, but I understand where this is at a different scale and something that wasn't necessarily requested, but that is happening.
Greg DeSisto, Shaw Road, Portsmouth. On the theme of precedent, this cost is the direct result of a civil lawsuit. Past civil lawsuits have been absorbed by the city. This, to my knowledge, is the first time the city has apportioned specific cost to a lawsuit that they were a defendant and lost to a targeted group of individuals. So is there precedent for this? And how will the city address this going forward?
Maybe you want somebody to answer that?
Yeah, if that's a question you want answered, then sure, we have an answer.
Sorry.
I'll give it back to the gentleman.
Thank you. Suzanne Woodland, Deputy City Attorney. So I can tell you this whole issue of the project being incorporated into the consent decree was not an issue of targeting, but trying to reflect the history that we understood in terms of the Department of Environmental Services listing in 2010, Sagamore Creek as impaired for bacteria. And so that is part of the impetus for why you would see this change and why we took into account an area that needed to be sewered. And that was due to the environmental, what we understand now is the environmental need. So I agree it's a different animal because it is incorporated in the consent decree, but it is not uncommon for us to go into neighborhoods, whether it's Pleasant Point or Brackett or Oxford, to extend sewer where it's needed. So I think there is more conversation to be had, but targeted is not the word that I would use. We see it as an opportunity.
Could you hand back to the gentleman?
Big opportunity. This is not an opportunity for us.
With all due respect, it's not a question of what the impetus for the suit was. It is really a question of who pays for civil liabilities of the municipality. And in this case, a small minority of residents are being asked to do that. I've never heard of that before.
I think this is an opportunity why it's come to the city council, because it is a little different than our typical sewer extension, so that is why the city council has this opportunity.
And as a council, we're just gathering information, so please share the information.
And sir, would you mind, City Clerk, sharing your name?
Sure. Michael Bean, Portsmouth resident, and also
The one who just spoke.
Greg DeSisto, Shaw Road.
Thank you.
Jerry Weber's old house.
my name is Michael Bean, Portsmouth resident, also own a commercial building on Sagamore Avenue, and 2 empty lots on Sagamore Avenue as well. So I just noticed in the wording for consideration this evening, it singled out or named just residential properties, and I would like it to be considered, regardless of the use as residential or non-residential, that it would be considered in the same terms as the residential pieces. So, and then I had one question. My question to the city manager, I think when you were going over the FAQ, you said you wouldn't have to tie in unless your system failed or you sold the property. So is that a trigger, or is that, that's a question.
Historically, that has been a trigger to make sure that subsequent property owners are not surprised by this obligation to tie in. So if you look at what happened with Pleasant Point, which was also a low-pressure system, very similar to what's proposed here, there was a communication that went out to all the property owners that explained the options, the loan options, the participation amount. I think their number was $10,000 roughly to tie in, along with their private costs for their pump and their system. So that's, you know, how it was done there.
Pass the mic to someone to speak.
I'm Kevin Smith, I live in Walker Bungalow Road. Pleasant Point, as a reference, the people at Pleasant Point asked for the sewer because they needed a set of systems that were, as they were building them, so like in a typical impact fee, when you're building something new, you commonly ask for help and you commonly get it, you pay for it. Most of the systems we're talking about aren't failed, we didn't ask for it, and so it's a completely different situation.
Thank you. We pass it over here.
Thanks, Kevin.
This is Christina Karowski on Walker Bungalow. How did you target our neighborhood if there are other neighborhoods that don't have sewer that might be more, less difficult to implement than our neighborhood?
Or if I could add, Courier Cove is right on the water, and it's not included, it's even closer to downtown. And that resident, they're right on the water. Many of these homes are not anywhere near the water.
And if I might add, Courier's Cove is actually considered kind of in our neighborhood, and it's not included.
So in regards to the water quality impairment side, the DES in 2008 identified Sagamore Creek. Well, in 2008 they started a process of doing what's called a total maximum daily load calculation for all state water bodies for bacteria. So by 2010 they had completed that work, and what it showed was that there was concern for Sagamore Creek. So in that report they were recommending between 80 and 98% reduction in the total load of bacteria to that water body. And one of the spots they identified with high bacteria coming in was from a perennial stream coming off of Walker Bungalow due to failed septic systems. So that's how the initial study of this area really kicked off. So that, you know, that doesn't mean that wasn't resolved, but you know, that's kind of how the study kicked off associated with the bacteria side of Sagamore Creek.
Terry, can you specifically respond to the point that's being made about Courier's Cove not being included in the proposal?
Courier's Cove is right at the top of, right across from Walker Bungalow, right?
Yes.
Down in the back, it has a private low-pressure sewer system that pumps up to Sagamore Ave, so they pay for that themselves.
On sewer, is what you're saying.
Yeah, they're on sewer.
Private road.
They're on sewer.
Yes.
They don't have septic.
They do not have septic.
They do not have septic.
They have a low-pressure sewer system, similar to what's proposed here, that they installed as part of that development, and it pumps up all the way to Sagamore Avenue. It's a completely private sewer main, services in the road, and the individual pump systems that are, you know, at each property. It's all theirs.
Thank you. Next, who's next? Thanks, Terry.
Thank you. I just had two additional points to make and one question of clarification. I'm Christina D'Alessandro from Walker Bungalow. My question is regarding that the assumption that we won't have to tie in until we have a failed system. But in state law, doesn't say those have to be post 1985, and that's a waiver you would grant. So I want to just clarification around that. And the second point I want to say is, you know, we've got a lot of good information tonight. Certainly the FAQ is helpful. It really would have been great if this could have been circulated prior to this. So going back to Council Esby, I really appreciate it. And the rest of the councils, if you would look at extending this, there does not seem to be any reason why with all of this new information and with the new things that we're learning every day and are likely to learn from the core samples, why we're making this decision tonight.
Thank you. Anybody else?
So could I get my question answered about the 1985?
So I have been here with the city since at least 15 years now and done most of these projects as part of the legal department. And I don't think there's been an occasion where, unless there was a very clear report of a non-functioning system, that we haven't provided the waiver. Our goal is when we update the sewer ordinance, which does need a comprehensive update, is to capture this waiver. But you could easily talk to any of the folks in those other neighborhoods where we've gone out to extend the sewer, and you'll find that the waiver is granted, and there's every intention to continue that and actually get it codified.
Okay, anyone else? Up back here.
I just wanted to add on to that real quick. Sandy DeSisto, Shaw Road. Would you be able to waive if the EPA wants everything hooked up by the end of the timeline for this, the consent decree?
As part of the negotiations, we very early on told them that the only way we would consider including this project is if there was a waiver. So we were very express at the beginning. There's been no change on the part of EPA, DES. We've been in communication with them. You know, CLF is aware. So we made it very clear that the intention was to put the sewer line in the road so that when you had failed systems, you would have some option other than replacing our system, given what we understood about the environmental benefits. So really, we made that clear right at the beginning of negotiations that unless we could make it on our terms, which is how we've done it in every other community, which is if your system is functioning, we're great. We'll just wait until you get.
Is that all in writing?
Mr. Anosco is next.
Oh, I wanted that clarification. So if you do sell your home, you do have to tie in, is that what you said? I didn't quite catch that.
Historically, that is what has been done in the past to make sure that second homeowners are not surprised at a later date. So that is what was done with
Right.
Pleasant
So-
Point, for example.
So if you're gonna, if it's $10,000 plus hookup, and we go to sell, that's a $35,000 loss in home value.
I'm sharing what has been done in the past.
Are taxes going down then because of that?
So, yeah, so we've got like 10 minutes left to flip over dogs. So if people haven't had a chance to speak.
Bill Pingree, I live on Sagamore Road. I just built a brand new house on Sagamore Road. I have about a $40,000 high-tech septic system. You're telling me if I sell this house in 2 years, I'm gonna have to pay that money or devalue my house for that amount? That's a question. I think the point that was made by this council is that the city is all of us is a really good point. The problem is that you're taking part of the city and segregating us to pay more than all of us should be paying. So, as far as the question on selling my house, what's the answer on that?
Is there an answer there?
We can.
Ordinance. What can happen is when we redo the ordinance, we can try to address that in that's the ordinance.
What does that mean, though?
What?
That doesn't solve the
Well,
problem.
again, the thing is, no, the fact is that right now, yes, you would have to, but we're going to be evaluating, as the assistant mayor said, and others, that we're going to be looking at the whole sewer ordinance, and we'll codify some of that. So certainly, yeah, this is input that we need, yeah.
Until you
So-
do that, if you devalue our home values by $35,000, will you effectively reduce our taxes for that?
Just to be clear, this council has no intention on being unfair. So please, let's just, it's kind of, we're gathering information. I think there's a cry for delaying it a bit. That may happen. It's up to the council, but, so let's just share information, work on this together, because we're really not intentionally trying to be unfair.
Yeah, and I don't mean to put this on. The other question I had, I understand that when they did the extension down Sagamore Road, that some properties were told that they wouldn't be able to do a septic system, but they could have a holding tank until the septic system went by their place. That would have been great in my situation too. It would have been a lot easier for me to put in a holding tank, get it pumped out once or twice a year, and then hook into the system when it's built. And I think this has been in the plans for a lot longer than 2 years.
3 years, 16 minimum.
16 minimum, so.
Anybody else want to share?
Thank you. Jean Zill, 27 Shaw Road. So, you know, we got the consent decree, which is a huge issue, and we're talking about legal precedent in terms of how the city's going to manage consent decrees. So staying in this pocket of the consent decree, which to me I read that the EPA wants the city to extend sewer service to the area. How will you be in compliance with the consent decree if you don't make everybody hook up? Are you just going to put pipes in the road?
Would you answer that question?
The consent decree does not require you to tie in. And the state law gives the city authority, and we've historically exercised that authority to grant waivers. It's been very clear from day one, it would not have been even proposed as part of the consent decree, but for everyone's agreement and understanding that it would be voluntary and not necessary until people actually had a need to tie in because their system was no longer functioning. And that was the whole point of it, and that's why, you know, it came about very organically, because it was, from our perspective, as long as you could choose when and if you needed to tie in, and, you know, at some point, even if it's 40 years from now, you'll need to tie in, depending on how much you use your septic system. It was important for us to have you have that opportunity for the benefit of the water body, and frankly, so that you would have an alternative other than just replacing your septic. But it might be a long, long time before that arises. And I think the challenge with what to do on conveyance, I can tell you what we historically did with Pleasant Point, and maybe there's another way to do that, but part of it is you just don't want a subsequent property owner to be surprised. So there are some options for the city council to consider.
To address that real quickly, even though you're saying you don't have to tie in, you're still telling us that you're going to charge us $10,000 as a minimum just to have the sewer line there. Is it a true statement? Kevin Eckhart, 260 Walker Bungalow.
You want to answer? Yeah, please.
Go ahead.
They don't tie in.
So, yeah, there's no payment needed until you elect to tie into the system.
So, but the infrastructure is still going to be there.
Correct.
Which you're saying we're going to accept capital costs not to exceed $10,000. So whether we have a good system or not a good system, it's still going to cost us $10,000. True statement.
When you tie in.
When you tie in.
When you tie in.
Only when you
It's a
tie
sewer
in.
and waiting.
When you tie
The
in.
sewer will be there waiting for you when you're ready to tie in. And then when you elect to connect.
I don't understand the difference between the numbers here.
Jump in here if I miss here, but, so we have to, you know, the city council has to give authorization to build the project. As we look out, you know, these costs have to be funded in some fashion. So we have to, you know, get the proper funding in place, which we using SRF in this case. And
That's
then
a state revolving loan fund.
State revolving loan fund.
What is that?
Okay. Go ahead.
Separate discussion, but,
I
we,
can talk about it.
and then, you know, essentially, we can carry those costs until the time that you tie in and the repayment starts. So even if it's 20 years down the road, you'll have to pay nothing until 20 years down the road when you elect to tie
But
in.
then there would be two costs. There would be the cost for the initial infrastructure of $10,000 plus the cost for the pump and the generator and all the other things to hook up to that.
Correct.
Correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Is that a private service that will do that? So you're gonna have to go out to bid, and that's a variable cost, it could be anything, and I live on the highest part of the ledge, like, what does that mean?
All right, we have about 5 minutes left, so a couple times for more questions.
I have a question. That's, you're only talking about $1 million then, 100 residents times $10,000. How could, the city must have $1 million sitting in somewhere they could put towards that. That's a lousy $1 million.
Yeah, please. It comes
You
out of
spent,
the-
you
it
spent
comes-
20,000 on Middle Road with those stupid plastic poles that get knocked over in the wintertime. I'll pay to
Sir,
run to the
sir,
sewer line,
sir,
why do I
please-
gotta pay
Please, you
10
don't have
grand?
to, please, just ask a question.
It's $1 million, it's nothing. How come the city just can't pay for that? It's it's a lousy $1 million.
So I'll answer your question. The idea was to make it equitable among other projects that have taken place in the city. Certainly, from what we hear tonight, the city council has other options that it can move on. So we believe that, people have paid, people on Islington Street, people on, and I know you said Pleasant Point asked for it, but other places have paid. And what we tried to do, unlike other communities that had these consent decrees, is we tried to have 80% of the fund, the enterprise fund, pay for the project, and 20% from the homeowner. This is something that we're not making this up here in Portsmouth the first time. This happens all over the country, and in not only New Hampshire, but Connecticut, Massachusetts. There is a cost share that's associated. And I think there can be other ways to address it, and certainly we can talk about that with the city council, and I think they've heard from it.
We have time for one more question. This gentleman back.
Right here with his hand up.
Yep, getting right to it.
Thank you, officer.
Thank you. My
I'll
name's
take the mic, okay? I'll take the mic.
Don't give her the mic. Really good. Don't give her
Very
the mic.
passionate.
David Witham, Walker Bungalow Road, and some of you know me. Up until recently, I had served 25 continuous years on city commissions and boards, and I know what it's like to be in the hot seat. I know what it's like to be in controversial situations, and I often get approached at the supermarket, whatever. How do you let that happen? How do you let that happen, even if it had nothing to do with me? And I've often had the city council's back or the city manager's back. But I gotta say, you've really blown it on this one. And that's what all this anger is about and frustration. You had the city council approve a bond for a sewer line, which essentially was a loan to us to pay for a sewer line. Because when it was 100%, we were gonna pay 100%, it was essentially a loan at that point, right? And we went to that meeting, Terry was from DPW, and there was almost a month ago to this day, and he stood up there, and we almost had to pry it out of him that we were paying 100% of the cost of the sewer line. That was only a month ago. And then shortly after that, at the city council meeting, council member, I think it was Reynolds and Beckstead, tried to bring up some questions about this because they were fielding phone calls, and they were cut off mid-sentence at that city council meeting and told it's too early, we have research to do, we don't have to talk about it yet, we're not that's way down the road. That was 2 weeks ago, and all of a sudden we show up tonight and we have a handout. Now and even at that council meeting, it was like, well, for example, maybe it'd be a 50-50 split, right? So we went from 100% to maybe 50% in 2 weeks, and now we're here tonight, and now we get a piece of paper that said it's an 80-20 split. This is a moving target, and we don't know where it's going, and I'm not sure why in a month things that went from 100% to 20-80. Now I don't think Terry made it up on his own that it was 100%, but now we're at 20. So again, this is a moving target, and that's what's very frustrating for people.
If I might speak, the fact is that the city council wanted us to come back with a report, which I did. I don't think at the meeting that you said they were going to have to pay 100%, did you?
Yeah, we allowed it.
Okay, well then.
We did, now we want to,
Well,
this is the
so,
recommendation.
all right, Terry, I'll take
Can I
it.
clear that up a little bit?
Sure.
So the question of cost came up about 15 minutes into the presentation. My response initially was I was not prepared to talk about it, and I was booed off the stage. And I understand, and I did on a number of occasions tell you that I understood that people were gonna be angry. It was not my decision.
Right.
So,
Thank you. So the thing is, what the council wanted us to do was look at how we could mitigate the cost. So as a result of that, we went out and we talked to various people throughout the United States and our rate consultant that we have. And what we did is we found that there are certain areas where the recouping of 100% of the cost is not required because of the overall benefit for the project and how it would benefit the entire environment. So the way that we came up with the amount was that we wanted to look at what other people have paid throughout the city. And those projects took place maybe 5-10 years ago. And we felt that, and we did take into consideration the issue of the ejector system at the house and getting it to the house. And we looked and said, okay, what would really make sense if we wanted to have this cost share? And we thought that the 80-20, because we don't know what the cost is going to be at the end of the day. I mean, costs are coming in 50% over opinion of costs now. We're finding that throughout because of what's happening in the economy. So we didn't want to lay out a number that might be twice that number by the time you're done. So what we wanted to do is we said, okay, let's use a percentage, 80-20, which is typical split. So what we did then is said, okay, but we don't know what that 20% could be. And we wanted to make sure people had the ability to plan. So what we did is we said, okay, let's cap it at the 10,000 because most people throughout the city in the various areas that had extended their sewers have paid that. And the next thing that we decided that we'd like to recommend to the council is that we would like to let them have a 10-year interest-free loan, which would mean, and again, Gary Epler has brought up a couple other issues. Certainly those are valid. If the council wishes to extend that loan 20 years, that's fine. But the fact is, what we wanted to do is make this as painless as possible, and we wanted to get information out because as it sat, more and more of this was just bubbling up, and we felt that it was important to get something to the city council for them to look and vote on. Now, they don't have to vote on that tonight, but what I thought was important was to say, okay, for those that are out there, in 3 years, I may have to pay an extra $1,000. We want to make sure we got that information out. Now, it's going to be up to the city council to decide length of a loan or maybe look at a higher percentage that the enterprise fund will...
With all due respect, John, I respect how you got to your number. We're responding to what we hear, all right? We're getting certain information. That's what we're responding to.
Well,
and you,
David,
you didn't know what Terry said, so that's
me.
not on you, but we're left to respond to what we're being
That's why we're
told.
here
That's
tonight,
what it
David.
is.
That's why we're here tonight.
Well, if you can shut me off,
No, you don't have to, but the fact is, I want to just have the opportunity to address people
I think
and
we've
clarify
been
things.
rational based on the information we've gotten now. The information keeps changing, so of course our opinions keep changing. You can shake your head, but we were told 100% a month ago.
Agreed.
And it might be 50-50 after that, and now it's 20-80.
No. The fact is, we
need to wrap up the public dialogue.
Let me just finish up here, Your Honor. The idea that we put the 50-50 was an example. It was specifically an example. I didn't want to specifically give a number until we were able to check with our rate advisor and make sure that we were doing the right thing. We never said it was going to be 50-50. We said this is an example that could happen. And again, the way we arrived at this is the $10,000 on the maximum was what other people have paid throughout the city. And we wanted to make sure that we had a loan in place for people. So we wanted to get information out as soon as possible, and that's why we did it the way we did. We could let it, the city council doesn't have to vote on it tonight. They can table it and we can talk more about it. And that's why the meeting tonight, and this is why we're having this discussion.
Thank you very much. Next meeting, we will have public comment. I'm sorry, the public dialogue is over. I'm sorry, we've gone way over time. We have a meeting we have to get to. Thank you, everyone. And you're always available.